My name is Sandhya Thukaram, and I'm an OKR evangelist slash coach. My journey with OKRs, which is objectives and key results, goal setting framework that was introduced in the 70s, started about 4 years ago. When I was with the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. And we introduced the system very casually. And as I talk through OKRs, uh, it becomes very clear why one mustn't adopt OKRs casually. But we did, and we didn't do particularly well. About a year and a half ago, when I took over as a chief operating officer, I decided to do it right, and the outcomes were remarkable. And it was very clear to me as I moved on from my previous role that this was a journey that I wanted to take. Because I really believe in the system. I believe in how powerful it can be. And I do believe the more India adopts it, both for organizations and individually, I think we can only benefit from it. But what are these OKRs? Uh, I've put up some really big names there: Intel, Google, Amazon, Netflix, Oracle, Vedantu. They've all adopted OKRs and they thrive. It wouldn't be wrong to say that a lot of these organization successes are linked to the use of this powerful framework. Ideas without execution is hallucination. It sounds cliched, but it is so true. Uh, an idea is only as good as the outcomes from it. And the OKRs framework really forces an organization and individuals to focus on what's important and therefore execute accordingly. OKRs, or objectives and key results, is a simple goal setting system to really enact significant change for for an organization's growth. Objectives are what you need to get done, and key results are how you will get it done. Why OKRs? There are just so many goal setting frameworks. Do we really need another one? Well, if it was another generic framework, the answer would be perhaps not. But OKRs is so specific. I use an analogy. Uh, Say you lived an hour away from the airport, uh, and the airport was two hours away uh, from where you lived. And sorry, say you lived an hour away from the airport and your flight was 2 hours away. Are you going to use that time to identify different routes? Or are you going to be able to or are you going to be able to be very incisive about the route you're taking? And quite simply, OKRs is that there's so much competition, there's so much to be done. What do you do to set yourself apart and get to where you need? And that's why OKRs is so important. A lot of organizations suffer from wrong objective setting. OKRs is a forcing function to really be specific about it, and there is zero ambiguity to it. There is so much clarity to it. In fact, a lot of employees don't quit organizations for, salary issues or um, colleagues. They mostly quit organizations because of the lack of clarity. And the OKRs framework really addresses that. It brings tremendous amount of clarity. I want to talk about really the man who introduced OKR, and Andy Grove, arguably one of the modern era's best managers, and with Intel. And he introduced this framework because he believed in execution more than anything else. And let's listen to him for a second here.
Two key phrases of the management by objective systems are the objectives and the key result. And they match the two purposes. The objective is the direction. The key result has to be measured, but at the end, you can look and without any argument say, did I do that or did I not do it? Yes, no. Simple.
I love that. Yes, no, simple. Imagine an entire goal setting system that boils down to the simplicity of yes and no. There's no ambiguity. And really, that's what makes the framework so effective. I want to spend some time on just the objectives. What are the objectives? Are the direction. What and where is an organization going? And good objectives are action oriented, inspiring, and significant. And it takes time to arrive at this because you need to get an entire organization on board and to be inspired. So it's important to spend time to arrive at something that's action oriented. It's not a passive um, statement. It needs to be something that everybody looks at and says, I want to be part of that objective. And it has to be significant, it has to lead to significant growth. The one thing OKRs are not are business as usual. And therefore, an objective has to be very, very significant. I want to share a good example of powerful objectives, and there's no better example than Bono, the lead singer from YouTube. And before I talk about his two objectives, just let's listen to what Bono has to say.
So you're passionate? How passionate? What actions does your passion lead you to do? If the heart doesn't find a perfect rhyme with the head, then your passion means nothing. The OKR framework cultivates the madness, the chemistry contained inside it. It gives us an environment for risk, for trust, where failing is not a fireable offense. And when you have that sort of structure and environment, the right people, magic is round the corner.
His words, especially where failing is not a fireable offense, never ceases to give me goosebumps, because I think a lot of us approach most of the things we do from a fear of failure. And OKRs is so transparent, it sets the bar so high, it encourages you to do your best and really break away from the fear of failure. I love Bono's objectives: debt cancellation of the poorest countries in the world, universal access to anti HIV drugs. They're inspiring, they're action oriented, they're significant. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? And anybody who reads it knows exactly what the ambition is. I want to do just a quick run through of the checklist when creating OKRs. A meaningful or significant change from status quo. An objective simply can't be business as usual. It has to be, I am here and how do I get there? That's significantly different. Is it specific enough? Is it clear? Like Bono's objective. It's very clear: debt cancellation in the world. There's nothing ambiguous about it. And it is a to do, it's an action, it's not a passive statement. It is about doing something to get somewhere. And so, it's important while crafting these objectives, every word there, one must avoid verbosity, but every word there must mean something towards what an organization and an individual is going to do. The key results is really the power of the OKRs. If I was asked what makes OKRs dramatically different from any other goal setting system, I would say the key results. The key results are so specific, like I've put here, it's specific and time bound. There is absolutely no ambiguity. It's aggressive. It is not at all, I want to go, I've been walking for 1 kilometer every day, let me walk 1.2 kilometers for the next week. No, it's about, I've been walking 1.1 kilometer and it's getting me nowhere. I'm going to up the ante to 5 or 10 kilometers. And that's the ambition it has, and therefore aggressive and measurable and verifiable. It is not left up to interpretation. Everybody who looks at it, or everybody who is responsible for making it happen, is very clear what the measure is. I have to walk 5 kilometers. Have I walked 5 kilometers or I haven't? As Andy Grove says, yes, no, simple. So the answer is that, and if I've walked 2.5 kilometers, it's very clear and it's there and visible for everybody to see. So, and that's why key results forces execution in a very specific manner and leads to the success of the goal setting framework. Just so one understands the simplicity and yet the significance of of goal setting here, I want to talk through this example. Summit the mountain safely. Summiting the mountain is significant, it's inspiring. Safely is very specific. You want to make sure that people are doing it safely, so you've put that out there. And summiting the mountain safely is an action. You're doing something. And there are key results of how to get there. The one clarity about key results is it's not at all separate, and it may seem like dumbing this down, but there are times I've seen that people have objectives and they have key results that don't necessarily connect. Every one of your key results is a stepping stone to getting to the objective. And typically, key results are framed as outcomes and not just output activities. So if one has put down a few key results thoughtfully, and if one has completed a lot of those key results, most likely you should have achieved an objective. So it is not random statements and metrics. It is thoughtful metrics that will get one to an objective. In this case, complete the climb in 6 days or less. So you've put a time to it. Make base camp before sundown each day. So it's very specific that you need to come back by base camp. Reach the summit with 50% of food and water remaining. So there's enough sustenance, and then with no one experiencing a major injury. So you're addressing the safety piece. And if each of these key results has been accomplished, then one would have summited the mountain safely. Another quick example, run a 10K in under 50 minutes or less. Significant, inspiring, very action oriented. And to get to that ambition, I would typically have to run 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes. So I know what to do. I need to increase this by a mile every day. Otherwise, I won't get to where I need to get, and reduce the time taken to run by 5 seconds every week. So really, my roadmap is so clear. I'm not wondering, I'm not guessing. I know I've put these 3 down, and if I diligently go after it, I will get to be able to run 10K in under 15 minutes or less. I do want to take a minute here and say, what if I didn't make a run 10K in under 50 minutes or less? Then I have to revisit my key results and say, have I not been able to achieve 100% of them, and therefore I don't have what it takes to get there? Or have I not chosen the right key results that is necessary? Perhaps I should have gone to the gym to build my strength and muscle strength to be able to complete that. And so there is that too, to be very careful and intentional about the key results to get you to where the objectives, to the objective one has put down. I will move on because I think the general idea of crafting the key messages are quite clear. I would like to, however, stop at one person's OKRs that I find terribly, terribly inspiring to date. Sundar Pichai set a 3-year objective. He was very clear. And I will talk later about really timelines for how objectives have to be set. It can be tweaked to different organizations. But in Sundar Pichai's case, he set a 3-year objective because it was a huge and ambitious one. Build the world's best browser. It wasn't running a 10K, achieving a 10K run. It was building the world's best browser. It needed the 3 years. In the first year, he chose one key result, 20 million users. He said if he gets to 20 million users, chances are Google would be the world's best browser. He failed, he fell short. Year 2, he upped the ante and said the key result is going to be 50 million users. He fell short. 37 million achieved. What I do want to call out here is, by setting a high bar, even if one falls short of the high bar, you're still way ahead of a low bar ambition. And so it's always about setting a hard goal for higher performance versus a weak goal for low performance. In year 3, his ambition was 100 million users, and he achieved 111 million users. And that was the power of being very clear about what he was going after. And one of the things I'd like to call out here is when an organization sets such a high bar goal, an OKR, then it isn't being done in a silo. It is being done in a collaborative manner. There's no way Sundar Pichai and a few people on his team sat there and got there. It meant pulling in all the necessary resources, getting people to collaborate at the highest possible level to get to this. And there was a very clear understanding that for those 3 years, this was a big bet that Google was going to take, and therefore it worked out. The benefits of OKRs, it's there to be seen, but I do want to spend a little bit of time on each aspect. Focus, alignment, collaboration, tracking, and stretch. Like I mentioned earlier, OKRs is about making the choices that one needs to make for transformational change. There is no way everybody can do everything and get to somewhere. It is about saying, if I need to get somewhere, what are the 2-3 things I've got to do? And what are the 2-3 things, equally importantly, that I have to let go? And that's why focus is so integral to the success of this framework. Alignment, it has to have an alignment across the organization. You can't have two people thinking that this is what an objective is, and 3 other people thinking the objective is something very different. And that's why it's so clear. It's simple and significant and inspiring and action oriented, and it's something that everyone in an organization is aligned to and therefore working towards it. Collaboration, a lot of times we talk about collaboration. Everybody wants to collaborate. I've never heard any organization say, oh, we discourage collaboration. But nobody really knows how to make that happen, because after meetings, people go back to their rooms and their desks and do what they have to. But OKRs, in a way, forces collaboration because you're working from the same objective. And therefore, everything you do is connected to that Uber objective. And since everybody is working towards that, the connecting dots are more visible. And it's less competitive and almost complementary that you work with different teams. And that's really why collaboration becomes such an inherent part of the OKR framework. Tracking, OKR doesn't happen in silence. It doesn't happen as a secret, because it's such a transparent way of functioning. Everybody and visible to everybody across the organization. Tracking it is very, very important to its success. One doesn't wake up 3 months later after setting the objectives and say, oh my god, I didn't make it. Inbuilt into the system is the process and the cadence of checking. Different organizations choose different cadences, and I will get to that soon. But it's important to track, so you're able to tweak and know and get teams back on track if they're going off it for whatever reason. And stretch, I keep saying this, it's not business as usual. OKRs are about an ambition beyond the regular. It really is about choosing a hard goal to set yourself apart and to really make transformative change happen. The guiding principles, these are just guiding principles. I always urge organizations to really understand the foundation and then make it work for them, because different organizations have different realities, and therefore one size fits all simply won't work. But if you're very clear about the foundational principles, it becomes easier to tweak it for an individual organization. OKRs are about maximum 5 objectives. And if you find that you have 10 objectives, you clearly haven't focused, and the conversation should be about making the choices and pruning it down. And for each objective, one typically has 3 to 5 key results. Again, if you have too many key results, chances are you're not making the right choices. And if you have too few key results, you may not be able to get to the objective. So the guiding really principles are about 5 objectives at max and 3 to 5 key results per objective. 60% of the objectives come from bottoms up. This is perhaps one of the principles that's most tweaked. The way I like to place OKRs is there is an Uber annual objective at an organization level, say 3 to 5, and then teams decide to create their OKRs that link to that on a quarterly basis. So this is a guiding principle, bottoms up, meaning teams build up their OKRs and connect it to the Uber organization objectives that are typically annual, and the teams break it down to quarter OKRs that connect to that objective. All must mutually agree. This sounds utopian, but if you have sensible organizations, and that's why OKRs, objectives in the OKRs are supposed to be inspiring, to ensure that it is easy to align with it. It becomes, I mean, to go back to Sundar Pichai's objective, build the world's best browser. I'm not part of Google. I'm never going to be a part of Google, but it almost wants me to be a part of Google. So it's so inspiring that it's easier to get teams aligned. And it is important to get alignment, because if you have different teams doing different things for different reasons, the framework will break. So transparency is a very important part. One page best, it's a guiding principle, but the idea is to keep it very specific, very simple, because if you understand, there is greater clarity versus reams of paper and material, and you don't even know what you're going to go after. So really the guiding principle is about keep it simple. Not a performance evaluation weapon. I cannot emphasize enough on why not linking OKRs to performance is so important, because the minute you link OKRs to performance, most likely people will lower their bar of ambition because they're afraid of failure. And the whole idea of OKRs is the freedom to fail, and therefore you can reach for the stars. And so it is important not to link it to performance evaluations. There will be some elements of how one has handled innovation to achieve a certain OKR that will find itself as a data point for performance appraisals, but it isn't a key area. Achieving your OKRs are not going to be how you will be appraised. What you did to get to your OKRs, how you innovated, how you collaborated, how you led, those are aspects that can make it to the performance appraisal. 60 to 70% of achieving an OKR is considered good. And the reason is, if you've typically hit 100%, it means you haven't been ambitious enough. There was room for a little more stretch. And one does want to encourage teams to stretch. So if you find that you've consistently hit 100%, the question to ask is, have we really chosen hard enough goals? On the other hand, if you've hit 30 to 40%, clearly you're not going to make it, and it is a failure. And the question to ask, and because we don't penalize people for failure in OKRs, the question to ask is, have we chosen the right key results? What should we be doing differently to achieve our key results versus it being a blame game? It really is about a conversation to get back on track. And one minor last point, continue incomplete key results only if they're still important. There are times when one has not completed a key result at the end of the specified timeline, say a quarter, and the conversation then is this still relevant, this particular key result, relevant to the next quarter goals? Or can I drop it here? And most likely you will find that you will need a new key result. But again, using the Sundar Pichai example, he needed to continue with the key result, though the metrics increased to get to where he wanted. But those are conversations one has. The OKR framework is the objectives and the key results, which we've already spoken about, but equally important are the initiatives, which are the activities. What are you going to do to reach your key results? And it's important to have clarity. How many times have we uh, found ourselves doing 3,000 things. At the end of the quarter, looked back and said, but I haven't got anywhere close to what the outcome I was supposed to achieve. And that's typically because we're so comfortable with doing a lot more and doing things for the sake of doing things, or sometimes to be busy, versus choosing very, very intentionally what those activities are that are going. I feel a lot of times, and I know these are generic sweeping statements, but there is truth in it. I think sometimes there's safety in numbers. We feel if we do 20 things somewhere, we'll get to it. But OKRs forcing you away from it and saying, no, you will get closer to where you need to get if you're very intentional about what you're doing. What are those activities? Don't be doing things if you can't connect the dots. And that's why the framework is objectives, key results, and the initiatives. What are you going to be doing to get you the key results? And are you making the right choices? Adopting OKRs is very, very different for very different organizations, depending on size, depending on ambition, depending on hierarchy and organization structure. So I'm not going to go into it. I just like to put the slide up to say that it happens differently. But I do make one point here, and that is I typically like when OKRs is introduced for the first time in an organization that it starts with a smaller core group. Once a small group is able to make it work for it, it makes it easier to take it across, because I found there's a lot of resistance otherwise because it seems complicated. So that's the one thing I urge organizations: start small and then phase it out. What OKRs are not. OKRs are not business as usual. I've said that constantly, but it really has to be internalized. I've found so many organizations, and like I said, when we first started it out at Game, that we put a bunch of things to do, and they were just things to do. It was business as usual tasks. They were not significant and inspiring and, something that would create transformative change. So it's so important to separate tasks. I just want to use perhaps you need visitors on a website. That's not an OKR ambition. However, an OKR ambition, a key result can be to increase website traffic by 40%. It's specific, and mostly it will be linked to an objective positioning of the organization. So that's kind of the difference. You will need to continue what you need to do to have website traffic, but to get to, from an OKR perspective, it becomes a very specific strategic move and not an activity. OKRs are not a proxy for good leadership and culture. It may seem like a lame statement to make, but really, at the end of the day, this is a framework. This is not leadership, this is not culture. But if you have good leadership and you have a culture that's really about bringing people together who want to be in an organization for the right reasons and bring their best, then with this framework, I truly believe impossible is nothing. OKRs are not a replacement for key performance indicators. They're typically complementary. KPIs gauge performance and identify problems. OKRs solve problems and also drive innovation at a strategic level. So you need both. And they are complementary. I made the point about OKRs not being linked to performance reviews and bonuses. OKRs are not work about work. They will seem like overwhelmingly process oriented when one first starts. And I'm not going to deny that. And typically there's resistance. But once that cadence is set, and once 2 or 3 cycles go by, people are very clearly able to see what they do is linked to an outcome. And when they see that path very clearly, they start actually focusing on the efficiency of the process, and it doesn't become work above work. OKRs are too much pressure. OKRs are not too much pressure, because to me, if you have clarity, you know exactly what you have to do. Pressure comes from not knowing what you're doing and where you're going. So I really don't think it's too much pressure. OKRs do not kill creativity. I actually think because it doesn't penalize failure, it really gives you the wings to try new things. And I think, to me, that really is the basis for creativity. So it does not kill creativity. There are many tools in the market. OKRs now have been adopted by multiple organizations, and really, uh, as one can imagine, there are many tools out there. And the I would say, try one and figure if it works. But to start off, I really believe Google Sheets are more than enough. The simpler you keep the process and the tool, the simpler it is to adopt the OKR framework. I've put down a quick sheet for OKRs for personal effectiveness, because it's now moved on from just being an organization goal setting framework to using it for powerful transformation for oneself. And really, as simple, I like to often use John Doerr's example. John Doerr, whose name I constantly use, is perhaps the OKR's framework's biggest evangelist. He's the one that took it to Google and many of the other organizations he was invested in. And one of his personal goals was to have at least 20 meals with the family in a month. And he knew he was successful at the end of the month if he had, depending on how many meals. It was very clear, was he able to get to 20 meals? So, people using it individually after they've seen it work so well for organizations is not an alien thing, and becoming increasingly popular. About me, I am now an OKR evangelist and coach. I used to be with the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, have been with an impact investing fund. I used to be a communications person, but the constant theme somehow has been entrepreneurship. And that's why I think I like this goal setting system so much, because it really allows entrepreneurs to succeed.
Sandhya, thank you so much for that presentation. And I love that we ended or sort of concluded the presentation talking about the multifaceted career you've had, from investing to running a company in the operational capacity to even now sort of approaching coaching and teaching people about OKRs. And I know you talked about how entrepreneurship was a key theme, sort of connecting all of those different areas of work. The question I wanted to start with was asking about how do OKRs say vary across these contexts? And I was also curious, do they have any geographic variants that do certain geographies and cultures approach OKRs in specific ways versus others?
Thanks, Varya. I enjoyed doing that. I don't know if anybody will love listening to me as much as I love talking about OKRs. The current love of my life is OKRs, simply because, and this will answer some of the questions you asked, right? My journey with OKRs started perhaps only 4 years ago, when at GAME we started out with it. And like I mentioned in my presentation, we did it terribly wrong. We chose a bunch of things. We had a loose understanding of what it took. And the one thing we did not do was set a cadence in place. So we would approach it like everything else, casually. And OKR is very intentional and incisive, which I learned when I took it on more seriously 2 years ago. And then the more I started to see how clear it was, to me it's a no-brainer. I don't know, this is such an extra thing to say. I feel like people should teach their children OKRs at home. It would make their lives easier, it would make children's lives easier, because it's so specific. You're not spending your life chasing, and it's fun. You may want to go on an adventure, and that's fine. But when you don't mean to go on an adventure and you want to get somewhere specifically, OKRs shows you the right direction. It's not casting a wide net. And to answer your question about what is the OKR context within different organizations, and then I'll try and link it back to some of my actually, it's a good point I have to where I am now. But but just first to answer your specific questions, I don't think OKRs as the framework changes in context. It changes more in how one adapts, how one phases it out, and really uh, what are the somewhat small tweaks you make. But as a context, I think it really suits most types of organizations. The smaller ones will probably uh, start small, which is what I advise, and the larger organizations are going to be more ambitious about getting all their employees on board. But coming back to context and me as an individual, Varya, I wish I had OKRs 30 years ago. I'm an I you know, I'm an accidental a lot of things in my career, and sure, I've landed okay, but I feel like some of the time I wasted wondering what the heck do I do with my life. I wouldn't have needed to if I'd had a framework that helped me be specific about it. I was an entrepreneur by not by design, but because I was born into a family family who was in business, a photography business. And so I just pretended to work for a bunch of time because it was easy. And then one day I woke up and I said, I'm smarter than this. And I went out and I got a job as a fundraising person with CRY, India's child rights NGO. And I did that for a year. And then I went to Sri Lanka for 6 months. I came back. I worked with Neemrana group of hotels to set up their corporate office. And then I said I was fed up with Bangalore, and I managed to get a job to lead a telecommunications team, having some of the biggest telecommunications clients for the practice. And don't ask me how I got that job, because I didn't know PR, I didn't know telecom, and I never had led a team. But the one thing, and that's the thing when I said entrepreneurship has been a consistent theme, Varya, is somehow being an accidental entrepreneur to begin with teaches you skills you much later appreciate, that you just need to get the job done. And I think that's the thing that's continued with me, this entrepreneurial drive to just get the job done. If you ask me what my key skill is, I don't have very specific skills, but I'll tell you, Varya, you want me to go take you to the moon, I will get it done, you know. And so really it's that. But towards the end of my time in practice, at the practice, I also managed the communication strategy for Sequoia Capital, which introduced me to the whole world of entrepreneurship. But alongside, I set up the social innovation vertical that was focused on organizations in the social impact space, which is about entrepreneurship. And suddenly what had become by chance became an area that I was both interested in and became quite good at, the impact investing space. And so my next job was very, very intentional. For the first time in my career, it was with United Seed Fund to find entrepreneurs we could invest in the impact investing space, and therefore continued the entrepreneurship theme. And when I was ready for my next assignment, I didn't look for GAME. GAME happened because I had a conversation with Ravi Venkatesan, who's the founder of GAME. And the next thing I knew, I became an early team member of GAME, which was about catalyzing entrepreneurship in India. So you see, somehow, even without planning it, entrepreneurship became a part of it. But I don't want to deviate too much from OKRs and make it about me, but I want to connect the two. While I appreciate where I have landed, I still feel a little bit more of intentional and specific planning would have I would have benefited from. You know, there are no regrets, but I feel there are some things. So what I'm doing today, Varya, is I have a very, very specific OKR agenda for where I want to go in the next 10 years. And this is very intentional. I have an objective. I have key results, both personally and professionally. And being the best OKR coach in India is my Uber objective now.
No, absolutely. And the next question I sort of had was even this, right? In a way, going from setting OKRs for an organization to setting OKRs for yourself. like you mentioned, the framework might be still very similar, but the process, I'm sure, is a lot different. Now you're also, in a way, working independently and setting up your own coaching practice. How do you look at OKRs both from the perspective of doing it for your practice, but then also teaching them to, organizations and individuals across the country?
It's like everything else. It's so much easier to teach than practice, right?
Yeah.
It's practicing what one preaches. But I try and follow the same cadence. Now, when one does it for an organization, part of the cadence and the process, Varya, is about having an OKR champion within an organization who then holds one accountable, and therefore there's a weekly check-in. What I do in my own case is I actually have a buddy who I don't have report into where I move on my overall OKRs, but breaking it down, just for instance, building the Sandhya brand. That sounds obnoxious, but I'm just going to word it because I can't think of anything else. She works with me on that, and to do that, I have to do 5 things. And so we do a weekly check in to see if I've said I'm going to write an article, then I report into her. I've written the article and she works with me. And she's doing it completely because she believes in what I'm doing. So when you have that kind of collaborator, you don't let it down. In some cases, you may not have such a collaborator, but I think it works well with having an accountability buddy. If you're someone, there are some people, Varya, who are very disciplined and born disciplined, and this will be beautiful. I'm not one of those. So I like the fact that I have a collaborator who keeps me disciplined, but I do have that. The cadence is there. Even though I'm doing it individually, I have it on my calendar. I update my goals and I work with that.
No, great. I think that's really helpful. And I think the final question I wanted to ask was that on NC, we have a lot of young entrepreneurs or people sort of just rising up to leadership levels and learning to now manage teams and units within their organization. Is there any final piece of advice that you have for them to think about OKRs and or honestly leading successful operations in their area of work that they can take away from this conversation?
I'm going to link it to your earlier question, which I didn't quite answer, and then close it with answering your specific question. You asked me at the very beginning, and I got diverted about, is there difference in geographical context and OKRs?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this because it won't be the popular answer, but I find that where people are used to systems and processes and rules, and that's more a Western and perhaps some parts of Asia like Japan and China, it's easier to adopt a process of transparency. I find in India, there is a greater deal of struggle, and I link that purely to lower levels of accountability, Varya. I find, and I don't blame employees alone. I think it's the chicken and egg thing. Culture itself has been so almost teacher student versus creating environments that makes employees want to be accountable. And that's why I'm connecting it to your specific question. I find leaders will find that they will be able to create an amazing environment with the clarity that OKRs offer. They will be able to bring their teams together going after a single goal because of the clarity that OKRs are able to offer. And finally, who doesn't want to be part of an amazing vision? And if you're able to get everybody together to pursue a vision, I really think that's the ideal place to be. And so I'm really, I almost sound like a priest now pushing a new religion, but I do believe